The gavel struck. Papers were signed, and in that instant she walked away, her lips curling in triumph as she spat. "You're nothing but a failure, Gregory. A poor, useless man. I deserve better." Everyone in the courtroom watched as she stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots, leaving behind the husband whose business had collapsed and whose name she dragged through the mud. But what Vanessa didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the man she just discarded was already the heir to a hidden $100 million fortune. And when fate flipped the script, the wife who thought she upgraded would become the woman begging for crumbs of forgiveness. The gavel struck the wooden block with a sharp crack that echoed across the courtroom. Case dismissed. Divorce finalized. The wife, slim, immaculately dressed, her lipstick sharp enough to cut, leaned forward across the table, her eyes cold and gleaming with triumph, locked onto her husband. "You're nothing but a failure," she hissed, sliding the signed divorce papers toward him. "A broke, useless man. I wasted years of my life tied to your sinking ship. Now I'm finally free." The room went silent, every lawyer and clerk trying not to stare. The husband sat motionless, his cheap suit hanging loosely on his frame. He looked beaten, his shoulders slumped. But behind his calm, dark eyes, something flickered, something she didn't see. Because what his wife didn't know was that the man she had just discarded was already worth over $100 million. Gregory Cole stared down at the divorce decree, his fingers trembling slightly as he picked up the pen. His wife, Vanessa, tapped her nails impatiently against the polished oak table. Each tap felt like a hammer pounding into his chest. "Sign it, Greg," she snapped. "Do us both a favor. The sooner I'm rid of you, the sooner I can breathe again." Her words sliced deeper than any blade. Once she had whispered promises of forever. Once she had sworn to love him whether rich or poor. Now she smirked as if the last decade of marriage was a joke. Greg scribbled his signature at the bottom, sliding the papers back to her attorney. Vanessa leaned back in her chair with a victorious smile, then leaned forward just enough so only he could hear. "You'll die poor, and when you do, no one will remember your name." The attorney gave a polite cough. "Mrs. Cole, the paperwork is complete. You're free to go." Vanessa stood smoothing her red designer dress. Her heels clicked like gunshots on the marble floor as she walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back one last time, her eyes glittering with cruelty. "You were just dead weight. I deserve better. And believe me, I've already found better." The courtroom doors closed behind her, the sound like a coffin lid sealing shut. Greg sat alone for a long moment, staring at the empty chair where his wife had been. The whispers started up in the background. Court staff exchanging pitying looks, lawyers shaking their heads. A failure. A loser. A man left in ruins. Greg finally stood, gathering his worn leather briefcase. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He didn't curse her name. Instead, he walked slowly out of the courtroom, his face unreadable. But in his chest, beneath the quiet exterior, burned an ember. The kind of ember that, with enough air, could ignite into an inferno. As he stepped out into the sunlight, Greg muttered under his breath, words no one else could hear. She has no idea who she just divorced. And for the first time that day, the faintest shadow of a smile crept across his lips. The memory replayed in Gregory's mind as he left the courthouse. The night everything began to unravel. 2 years earlier, he had been the proud owner of Coltech Fabricators, a small but promising construction supply company in Lagos. Orders poured in. Contracts with mid-sized developers kept the warehouse busy, and Gregory often worked late, sleeves rolled up. Dreaming of expansion, Vanessa, then still by his side, loved the glow of success. She wore the expensive handbags, dined at the finest restaurants, and posted their vacations online with captions like, "Married to ambition." But ambition had a cost. It started with one delayed shipment. Then another. A deal with an overseas partner collapsed when global markets dipped. A fire in the warehouse destroyed half their inventory. Suddenly, contracts were canceled, debts mounted, and banks circled like vultures. Gregory fought to save everything. He begged suppliers for extensions, pulled overnight shifts, even sold his prized SUV to pay off a fraction of the debt. But the spiral was unstoppable. Vanessa's love soured quickly. One evening, he stumbled home past midnight, exhausted, his shirt damp with sweat. He found her in the living room, scrolling on her phone with a glass of wine in hand. Vanessa, he sighed, collapsing onto the couch. Just give me more time. I can turn this around. I just need a few more weeks. She didn't even look up. Time? Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air. You've been saying that for months. You promised me a life of luxury, Gregory. Do you see this house? It's falling apart. Do you see me? I look like a fool standing next to women whose husbands actually provide. Greg rubbed his temples. This isn't permanent. Business is about cycles. You knew that when you married me. She laughed bitterly, finally looking up. I didn't marry you for cycles. I married you for stability. For success. Not for this. She gestured toward him as if he were a stain she couldn't scrub out. The word stung more than any financial loss. That night, as Gregory sat alone at his desk reviewing unpaid invoices, he overheard her on the phone in the next room, whispering to a friend, "If he doesn't fix this, I'm gone. I won't waste my life with a man who can't keep up." The crack in their marriage had widened. Weeks later, the collapse was complete. His final supplier pulled out, banks froze his accounts, and his employees walked away. The once bustling warehouse echoed empty. Gregory stood inside, surrounded by dust and silence, his dream in ruins. At home, Vanessa packed designer clothes into suitcases. She didn't hide her disdain anymore. "You're finished," she spat. "You're not a husband, you're dead weight. I won't drown with you." Greg begged her to stay, but her eyes were already elsewhere, fixed on a brighter future she planned to secure without him, and that's how the countdown to betrayal began. The ink on the last foreclosure notice had barely dried when Vanessa stepped into a new world, one built not on Gregory's sweat, but on another man's wallet. She made the transition effortlessly. One day she was the wife of a struggling businessman. The next she was riding shotgun in a silver G-Wagon owned by a wealthy importer named Raymond King. He was older, broad-shouldered, and carried the kind of swagger that made people listen when he entered a room. To Vanessa, he was the upgrade she deserved. At the upscale restaurant in Victoria Island, she laughed too loudly at Raymond's jokes, tossing her hair back, her diamond earrings catching the light. Around the table sat couples who once dined with her and Gregory, only now their sympathetic glances had turned into admiring ones. "You really traded up," one of the women whispered to her when Raymond stepped away to take a call. Vanessa smirked, sipping her champagne. "Darling," she replied, her voice smooth as silk, "I don't settle for failure. Life is too short to cling to sinking ships." Meanwhile, across town, Gregory lived in a dimly lit one-bedroom flat. The rent was months overdue. His meals were simple, beans and rice, bread when he could afford it. He kept his clothes folded neatly, though most were worn thin from years of use. At night, he sat alone, replaying Vanessa's words in his head. Deadweight, worthless, failure. The words clawed at his soul, but instead of breaking him, they began to forge him into something new, harder, colder, sharper. The city seemed to conspire to rub his face in her betrayal. One afternoon, trudging past a luxury boutique, Gregory froze when he saw Vanessa inside. She was twirling in front of a mirror, modeling a silk dress, while Raymond tapped his credit card on the counter with casual indifference. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Vanessa smirked and mouthed the words, "Look at you." Gregory clenched his fists but said nothing. He turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. That night in his flat, he stared at the cracked ceiling and whispered to himself, "Endure. Just endure. The tables will turn." Back in her new world, Vanessa flaunted relentlessly. She posted pictures on Instagram. Her in designer gowns, her on yachts, her sipping cocktails at exclusive clubs. The captions stung like poison. "Living my best life. When you let go of dead weight, you rise higher. Some mistakes are blessings in disguise." Every post was a dagger. Friends who once pitied her began gossiping. "Have you seen Vanessa? She's glowing. That poor ex of hers, he must feel like trash." And yet Gregory said nothing. He didn't respond. He didn't fight back. He simply watched, waited, and endured. Because what Vanessa didn't know was that fate was already moving pieces behind the curtain, pieces that would soon make her mockery the stage for her greatest humiliation. Gregory's life shrank to survival. Gone were the boardrooms, the bustling warehouse, the late-night strategy sessions. Now his days were measured by sweat and wages, barely enough to cover food. He worked wherever he could, Some days he carried cement bags at construction sites, his once smooth palms blistered and raw. Other days he washed cars for wealthy clients, scrubbing the gleaming hoods of machines he once dreamed of owning. At night he pushed wheelbarrows of produce at the market for a few naira. No one recognized the man he used to be. At one site, a young mason looked at him and muttered under his breath, "From boss to laborer, life is wicked." Gregory heard it, but he only tightened his grip on the sack of sand he carried. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. His one comfort was silence. When the work ended, he walked the streets alone, hands in his pockets, head low, eyes on the cracked pavement. The silence was better than the noise of betrayal. But even in silence, Vanessa's ghost haunted him. Billboards of luxury brands she now flaunted filled the city. Social media fed him her smiling face when he least expected it. Friends avoided him, not out of malice, but out of the awkwardness of not knowing what to say to a man who had lost everything. And yet, under the crushing weight of humiliation, Gregory's heart remained strangely calm. He didn't drink to numb the pain. He didn't lash out. He simply endured, whispering the same words each night before sleep. "This is not the end." Then one rainy evening, soaked to the bone after a shift unloading trucks at the port, Gregory returned to his flat to find a letter slipped under his door. The envelope was thick, the paper heavy. He frowned. He hadn't received mail in months. Inside, a short note. "Mr. Gregory Cole, we require your presence at the chambers of Attorney Samuel Attawale regarding the estate of Mr. Henry Cole. Kindly report within 7 days." Gregory froze. Henry Cole, his late uncle, a man estranged from the family for decades. He read the note 3 times, disbelief flooding him. His uncle had been wealthy. Rumors spoke of overseas accounts, properties in Abuja, investments in oil. But Gregory had never expected to be mentioned in any will. For the first time in months, something stirred in his chest that wasn't pain. It was a flicker of possibility. The next morning, while carrying cement bags under the scorching sun, his mind wasn't on the weight pressing into his shoulders. It was on that letter, tucked safely in his pocket. Maybe fate wasn't done with him. That night, lying on his thin mattress, Gregory whispered, "She left too soon. She thought it was over. But this story isn't finished." Outside, the rain fell steadily against the tin roof, a rhythm that sounded almost like a drum roll, ushering in the first beats of a life about to change forever. The law office was nothing like the places Gregory had been frequenting in recent months. Instead of dust and cement, it smelled faintly of polished wood and leather. The reception desk gleamed. The secretary's heels clicked softly against marble tiles. And for the first time in a long time, Gregory felt out of place, not because he didn't belong, but because he had forgotten what belonging to success felt like. "Mr. Gregory Cole?" the secretary asked with a polite smile. "Yes. Attorney Attawale will see you now." Gregory entered the office, his heart pounding. Behind the mahogany desk sat a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a calm, commanding presence. His gray suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted. He rose to shake Gregory's hand. "Mr. Cole," he said warmly, "I am Samuel Attawale. Please sit. We have much to discuss." Gregory lowered himself into the leather chair. His palms were clammy, his throat dry. The lawyer opened a thick folder, sliding papers across the desk. "As you know, your late uncle, Mr. Henry Cole, passed 6 months ago. His estate has been under review, and after careful deliberation, you have been named one of the primary beneficiaries." Gregory blinked. "Beneficiary?" "Yes, in fact." Attawale adjusted his glasses, glancing at the documents again. "You are the sole heir. Your uncle left everything to you." The words hung in the air like thunder. Gregory's mouth went dry. "Everything? But my cousins, my relatives, surely—" The lawyer shook his head. Henry Cole was a complicated man. He trusted very few. In his final will, he named only one person, you. He slid a typed summary toward Gregory. Numbers, properties, investments, all neatly listed. Gregory's eyes widened as he read, "Offshore accounts. $285,000 Lagos real estate portfolio. Valued at $40,000. Oil and gas investments. $22,000. Miscellaneous assets, vehicles, art, bonds. $9,500,000 total net worth. $100,000 plus." Gregory's hands trembled as he gripped the paper. His vision blurred. A man who had been begging for daily wages yesterday now sat on a fortune that could reshape his entire existence. I don't understand, he whispered. Why me? Adewale leaned back, studying him. Your uncle followed your career from a distance. He admired your determination even in failure. He wrote here. He flipped to another page, reading aloud. Gregory may fall, but he will rise again. He has the resilience this family needs. I trust him with everything I built. Tears stung Gregory's eyes. For months he had been called a failure, mocked, humiliated, discarded. Now, from beyond the grave, a man he barely knew had declared him worthy of a legacy vast enough to shake the ground beneath Vanessa's arrogance. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, effective immediately. You are in control of this estate. I recommend discretion. Many will come for you when they discover what you hold. Gregory sat in stunned silence, the weight of $100 million pressing down on him. Then slowly, a smile tugged at his lips. Not of greed, but of quiet vindication. Vanessa's words echoed in his memory. You'll die poor. You'll never matter. She had no idea how wrong she was. The difference between their worlds had never been clearer. On one side of Lagos, Vanessa lounged poolside at a 5-star hotel, her laughter echoing off glass towers. She dipped her toes into the shimmering water, her designer sunglasses glinting in the sun as Raymond poured champagne into her glass. She raised her phone, snapping a selfie with Raymond kissing her cheek. Moments later, it appeared online. When you choose right, life feels like a dream. The comments rolled in instantly. Couple goals. So happy for you, sis. You deserve this luxury. Upgrade unlocked. Vanessa scrolled with smug satisfaction. The narrative she spun was complete. She was the woman who had escaped failure and claimed success. In her mind, Gregory was a forgotten chapter. But across town, in a private boardroom high above the city skyline, Gregory sat in silence. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected his new suit. Tailored, sharp, nothing like the frayed clothes of his laborer days. Beside him, Attorney Adewale spread documents across the table. Investment accounts, business deeds, property titles, all transferred into Gregory's name. Bank manager shook his hand respectfully. Former colleagues, once dismissive, now looked at him with awe. Mr. Cole, Adewale said, with this level of capital, you have choices. Do you wish to manage the empire yourself or appoint a board? Gregory's voice was calm, steady. I'll learn. Every detail. Every account. Every asset. This isn't just money, it's my second life. And I won't waste it. He remembered Vanessa's mocking words. You'll die poor. No one will remember you. That memory became fuel. While Vanessa flaunted, Gregory disappeared into quiet strategy. He hired private tutors in finance, surrounded himself with seasoned advisors, and began reconstructing himself as more than a man with money. He became a man with vision. Days turned to weeks. Slowly, the pieces of his empire took shape. New businesses launched. Real estate ventures expanded. Offshore accounts grew. And all of it he kept hidden. No announcements, no social media, no leaks. One evening, after a long meeting with oil executives, Gregory stood on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the city. The air was cool. The lights spread out beneath him like a sea of stars. He pulled out his phone and opened Instagram. Vanessa's latest post filled his screen. Her laughing with Raymond at a champagne dinner. For the first time in months, Gregory allowed himself a small laugh. Enjoy it while it lasts, he murmured. The day is coming when you'll choke on that smile. He didn't need to post. He didn't need to flaunt. His silence was his weapon, and when the time came, it would strike harder than any caption or photo could. Weeks turned into months, and Gregory Cole emerged from the shadows as if sculpted anew. His days were no longer spent hauling cement or scrubbing cars. Instead, he commanded meetings with investors, signed multi-million-dollar contracts, and walked into boardrooms where every eye turned in respect. The first purchase he made wasn't a flashy car or a mansion. It was silence. He bought anonymity. No press releases, no flashy posts, no whispers in the wrong ears. His wealth was hidden behind trusts, shell companies, and lawyers who knew discretion better than they knew the law. Still, transformation had its symbols. A penthouse overlooking the Lagos skyline, a fleet of black SUVs waiting at his command, a wardrobe tailored in Italy, and the quiet power of men and women in expensive suits calling him sir. At his side was attorney Attawale, who guided him through every detail. "Mr. Cole, your uncle built wealth, but you—" He tapped the folder of newly acquired assets. "You are building influence." Gregory didn't smile. He didn't boast. He only nodded, his voice low. "Influence is better than money. Money buys a seat at the table. Influence decides who gets to sit." Meanwhile, Vanessa had fully immersed herself in the illusion of perfection. She and Raymond became fixtures at Lagos's social scene. Charity galas, nightclub openings, private beach parties. Cameras caught them everywhere. Vanessa craved it. One night at a gala lit by crystal chandeliers, she held Raymond's arm like a trophy. "Darling," she whispered loudly enough for her circle to hear. "Can you imagine if I had stayed with Gregory? Me living in poverty? No, I was born for this life." Her friends laughed. Champagne glasses clinked. Vanessa's red gown trailed behind her like fire as she basked in the admiration. But rumors had a way of circling back. At that same gala, across the hall, a man in a tailored midnight blue suit slipped past unnoticed. He didn't approach her. He didn't need to. He only observed. Gregory Cole standing at a distance watching his ex-wife flaunt herself in ignorance. She didn't recognize him. Not yet. His posture was different now. Confident, commanding, unbroken. Where once she saw a man bowed under the weight of failure, now stood a man who carried wealth and power like an invisible crown. Their worlds were on a collision course, but Vanessa couldn't see it. Later that night, back in his penthouse, Gregory looked out at the glittering city lights. He poured a glass of whiskey, letting the silence settle around him. "She traded me for wealth," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "But now I am wealth. And when she realizes, it will already be too late." It began as gossip over champagne flutes. Vanessa was at brunch with her friends, seated in a high-end rooftop lounge overlooking the lagoon. The table buzzed with chatter about fashion, politics, and business, until someone leaned forward with a gleam in her eyes. "Have you ladies heard about the new billionaire in town?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Another oil prince?" No, not that type," her friend corrected, lowering her voice. "This one is different, quiet, ruthless, nobody knows where he came from. They say he's buying up properties, outbidding old money families, and he never shows his face in the tabloids." Vanessa smirked. "If he's that rich, he'll show up sooner or later. Men like that always want attention." Her friend shook her head. "Not this one. They call him the Silent King. Some say his fortune is in the hundreds of millions." Vanessa rolled her eyes, sipping her mimosa. "Hundreds of millions, please. If he's that wealthy, I would know. Lagos is small. People like me don't miss details." The conversation moved on, but the name lingered. The Silent King. That evening, she mentioned it to Raymond while they dressed for another event. "Darling, there's talk of some new player in the city. Filthy rich, apparently." Raymond adjusted his cufflinks, unimpressed. "There's always talk. Half of it is rumors. And even if it's true, he's not competition. I know every major investor in this town." Vanessa kissed his cheek and let it go. But the seed of curiosity was planted. Across town, in a private boardroom, Gregory Cole sat at the head of a long glass table. Around him were men and women who once ignored him, now leaning forward to catch his every word. "Acquire the waterfront properties," Gregory instructed, "and the garment factory in Ibadan, buy it outright. Rebrand it. I want it profitable within the year." "Yes, sir," his managers replied. Gregory closed the file and leaned back, silent for a moment. His empire was expanding like wildfire, each decision doubling the weight of his presence in the city. And still his name had not surfaced. Not yet, but he knew the whispers were spreading. The Silent King, it amused him. Later, when the meeting ended, Attawale lingered. "Your ex-wife will hear of you soon, Mr. Cole. Lagos is too small for her not to." Gregory's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Let her hear. Let her imagine. The anticipation will break her long before I reveal myself." Meanwhile, Vanessa scrolled through Instagram late that night, pausing on a gossip page. Who is the Silent King? The billionaire buying Lagos piece by piece. The post showed luxury cars entering a private estate, bodyguards in black suits, and hints of a man stepping out, his face obscured. Vanessa narrowed her eyes, a flicker of unease crossing her face for the first time. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, every crystal catching the light like 1,000 tiny suns. Lagos's elite had gathered for the annual Investors Gala, A night of tuxedos, gowns, and whispered deals made over champagne. Vanessa walked in on Raymond's arm, her red gown hugging her frame, her head held high. She loved nights like this, the flashing cameras, the murmured envy of women, the smug nods of men who respected her for being attached to a man like Raymond. She was certain tonight would cement her place among the city's untouchable socialites. "Darling," she whispered to Raymond as they entered the hall. "This is the kind of life I was made for." Raymond smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Stick with me, Vanessa. I'll make sure you never go back to the shadows." The evening flowed with laughter and music until the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor a man whose vision and investments are transforming this city. You may have heard whispers of him, Lagos's silent king. Allow me to welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Gregory Cole." The ballroom erupted in applause. Vanessa froze. The name slammed into her chest like a bullet. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard, but then the crowd parted and there he was. Gregory. Not the man she'd left behind, gaunt and broken, but a new version. Reborn. His tailored tuxedo fit like armor, his posture regal, his presence magnetic. Flanked by bodyguards, he walked with the confidence of a man who owned the room. The applause swelled. People surged toward him, eager to shake his hand, to be seen speaking with him. Investors she had spent years trying to impress practically bowed at his presence. Vanessa's jaw slackened. Her glass slipped in her hand, spilling champagne onto the marble floor. That can't be," she stammered. Raymond frowned. "You know him?" Her throat went dry. He's my ex-husband." Raymond's face darkened. "Ex-husband? That man?" He looked back at Gregory, who was now shaking hands with the governor, photographers snapping pictures of him at every angle. Vanessa felt the room spin. The man she had mocked, humiliated, discarded, was the very man now commanding the respect she craved. As Gregory approached the podium, his eyes swept the crowd. For a split second they locked on Vanessa. Her knees weakened, but Gregory didn't flinch. He didn't break stride. He simply offered the crowd a calm smile and began his speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, wealth is not measured by the money you hold, but by the resilience you possess. True strength is born when you've been broken and you rise again." Every word cut her deeper than the last, and in that glittering hall, Vanessa realized her greatest mistake. She had left a man who wasn't finished. The gala was ending, but Vanessa's world had only just begun to collapse. Gregory had finished his speech, mingled with governors, CEOs, and dignitaries, then exited with his bodyguards surrounding him like a wall of black suits. The air around him was electric, powerful, untouchable. Vanessa's chest tightened with desperation. "I need to talk to him," she muttered. Clutching Raymond's arm, Raymond pulled back, his eyes cold. "You didn't tell me you were married to that man. Do you realize how foolish you made me look? All this time your ex-husband was richer than me." "Raymond, please," she began. He cut her off, his voice low but sharp. "You're on your own." He dropped her hand, turned, and walked out without looking back. Vanessa's breath hitched. The room tilted, her foundation crumbling beneath her heels. Raymond was gone. The safety net she thought she had secured had been ripped away, and so, trembling, she gathered her courage and moved toward Gregory. The crowd parted slightly as she approached, though not for her, it was for him. He stood by the exit, speaking softly with Adewale, his lawyer, and 2 business partners. His posture was unhurried, his expression calm. "Gregory," she whispered, her voice fragile. He turned. For a heartbeat their eyes met and her stomach dropped. There was no warmth in his gaze. No trace of the man she once knew. Only a quiet, steel-hard detachment, Vanessa. His voice was even, unreadable. She forced a smile, her tone sweet. "It's been so long. You look incredible. I've missed you." Behind him, his partners exchanged amused glances. Adewale's face remained unreadable, but his eyes flicked with curiosity. Gregory didn't move. "Missed me?" "Yes," she said quickly, stepping closer, her perfume clinging desperately to the air. "We made mistakes. I made mistakes, but I see now. You were always destined for greatness, and I was too blind to see it." A murmur rippled through the small circle of elites watching. The scene was turning into entertainment. Gregory's lips twitched, not into a smile, but something colder. "You told me once I was worthless, that I'd die poor," Her throat tightened. I was angry. I didn't mean it. You meant every word. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it silenced her. You mocked me when I was down. You laughed while I carried stones to survive. You paraded another man in my face. And now, he paused, letting the silence stretch. Now you remember me? The humiliation stung like fire across her cheeks. The crowd around them had gone silent, every ear tuned to the exchange. Tears filled her eyes. Greg, please, give me another chance. I still love you. Gregory tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then in front of everyone, he spoke with cutting finality. No, Vanessa. I don't recycle betrayal, not even for free. The words hung heavy in the air. Laughter, quiet at first, then louder, spread among the onlookers. Vanessa's face burned red as her carefully crafted image shattered like glass. Gregory turned away, stepping into his waiting SUV without another glance. The doors closed, the convoy rolled out, and Vanessa was left standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, her mascara streaked, her pride in ruins. The night after the gala, Vanessa's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, she thought it was support from her friends, but when she opened her messages, her heart sank. Screenshots of the confrontation spread like wildfire through Lagos's social circles. Memes were already circulating. I don't recycle betrayal printed over her humiliated face. Side-by-side photos of her with Gregory the failure versus Gregory the silent king. Whispered jokes in group chats. Vanessa traded a king for a clown. By morning, the damage was irreversible. Raymond blocked her number. His friends distanced themselves instantly. Invitations to parties dried up. Brands that once begged her to wear their gowns quietly pulled away. The woman who had flaunted her upgrade now found herself downgraded to nothing. She tried to reach Gregory again, leaving voicemails dripping with tears. Greg, it's me, I was wrong. I see that now, please. Just meet me, even once. I still love you. I've always loved you. Don't let one mistake ruin us. But Gregory never responded. Her so-called friends turned vicious. At brunch, they whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Poor thing thought she won the lottery. She left a gold mine for crumbs. She deserves it. Humiliation was her new shadow. One night, desperate, she showed up at Gregory's penthouse. Forcing her way past the reception desk, she was trembling, her mascara smeared, her once proud heels clicking with uncertainty. The bodyguards at the door didn't even glance at her twice. Mr. Cole doesn't take visitors without appointment. Tell him it's his wife, she begged. Please, he'll see me. The guard's expression didn't change. Mr. Cole has no wife. The words crushed her like a stone. She stumbled back onto the street, staring up at the towering building that now belonged to the man she had mocked as a failure. The man who once begged her to stay. The man she had left for dead. Now she was the one discarded. Her Instagram posts dried up. Her wardrobe gathered dust. Nights that once sparkled with champagne now drowned in cheap wine and silence. The city that once applauded her name now laughed when it passed her lips. And still, everywhere she went, she saw Gregory's shadow. On billboards, in the headlines, whispered in admiration at every corner. It was a torment she couldn't escape. For the first time in her life, Vanessa truly understood the cost of betrayal, and it was a debt she could never repay. Weeks after the gala, Gregory Cole stood at the head of a long boardroom table. Around him sat governors, CEOs, and business leaders, all waiting for his verdict on a new project. His empire had grown beyond his uncle's inheritance. He had turned 100 million into something far larger: power, respect, legacy. When the meeting ended, the executives filed out, leaving Gregory alone with attorney Adewale. You've rebuilt everything, Adewale said, closing his notebook. You've surpassed your uncle's vision. But tell me, are you satisfied? Gregory looked out at the skyline, the same city that had once mocked him now bending to his will. He thought of Vanessa, her laughter at his lowest point, her cruel words in the courtroom, her begging in the ballroom. He thought of her downfall, now the talk of every social circle. Am I satisfied? He repeated quietly. Then he smiled, but it was a smile without joy. No, Adewale. Satisfaction is temporary. What I feel is justice. That evening, Gregory agreed to a rare interview with a prestigious business journal. Cameras rolled as he sat in his penthouse, calm, poised, untouchable. The interviewer asked. Mr. Cole, people say your rise is one of the most remarkable stories in recent memory. What lesson do you think others should learn from your journey? Gregory leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, deliberate. Never measure a man by the season he is in. Today's storm does not erase tomorrow's sunrise. And never betray someone because they're struggling. You don't know what destiny has written for them. Wealth can be lost and rebuilt. But respect, once broken, is gone forever. The words struck like lightning. Clips of the interview flooded social media, echoing across every screen. And though he never mentioned her name, everyone knew who those words were meant for. Somewhere across the city, Vanessa watched the interview alone. Her apartment was small now, her wine cheap, her phone silent. Tears slid down her cheeks as Gregory's voice carried through the television. You can recover money, you can rebuild empires, but once trust is destroyed, all that remains is regret. She reached out, touching the screen, whispering through sobs. Gregory, forgive me, but Gregory Cole wasn't listening. He had already closed that chapter. The final shot showed him standing on his balcony overlooking the city he now owned in silence. His hands rested in his pockets, his posture calm, his eyes set on the horizon. Not gloating. Not flaunting, just finished. The man who was once abandoned as a failure was now the story. Every man and woman in Lagos repeated in awe, and Vanessa, once. The woman who thought she upgraded was the cautionary tale whispered in shame. Never. Laugh at someone's struggle. Tomorrow they may own the table you're begging to sit at.